ponencia de Shelley Manion. Ella es Senior Product Manager en el British Museum y su ponencia tiene el título Repensando, la audioguía del British Museum. Ya está vinculada al British desde hace 5 años y anteriormente ha trabajado en el Imperial War Museums, en el Rubin Museums of Art y es licenciada en Historia del Arte por el Smith College y la Universidad de California. Además, tiene una maestría en Ciencias de la Comunicación por la Università della Svizzera italiana. Y ahora, bueno, pues está ya lista cuando quieras.
Did I understand that there's translation available for this talk? So is everyone clear if you need translation? Marta, is it correct that they should move to the back? Is that right? So if there's anyone you feel that you need translation, I'm so sorry that I'm speaking in English. If you need translation, please don't hesitate, right? You can just go to the back and get some headphones. Can you not hear me? ¿Mejor? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Diego? Yeah? Okay. All right. So I'm used to doing my presentation standing up, so I feel a little bit stiff, especially at this point in the afternoon. I feel like I should ask you all to stand up and have a stretch. Just maybe not a bad idea. Why don't you stand up for a moment and just stretch? I think we could all use that. Go ahead. Stand up for a second. All right. So a huge thank you, really, for those who've organized the conference. It's a real privilege to be here and amongst all of you and to hear what's been going on in Spain and elsewhere. It's been a very long year for me at the British Museum, and I haven't gotten out of my own context enough. So it really is a privilege to be here and hear about some of the work that you're doing, which is excellent. Rethinking the British Museum's audio guide is what I've been busy with during the last year. And before we start, I should say that in meetings like this, I usually say things that make some of my colleagues in the museum upset. Sometimes I share things about sponsors, and sometimes I say things about money, which I probably shouldn't. So if I say either of those two things, either anything unflattering about any sponsor or anything which reveals too much about our financial situation, please don't tweet that information. You're welcome to tweet everything else. The British Museum has had an audio guide for a very long time, and Elena showed some pictures earlier about of what an earlier audio guide looked like. Now, she said that she thought that they changed a lot, but I have to disagree. I think the audio guides haven't changed very much at all. The sizes of the audio guides we have might be a little bit smaller, but in many respects, the audio guide is it's a staple, isn't it, of museum products. It's something that our visitors recognize, it's something that they know, and it's something that they have a lot of expectations about. And that's one of the things that we set out to investigate when we decided to redesign and relaunch our audio guide over the last year. So the British Museum receives about, 6.7 million visitors last year. So we are working on a very, very large scale, which presents unique challenges, which some of you are fortunate not to have. We sell around 170,000 of our adult audio guides every year. Now that might sound like a large number, but compared to 6.7 million visitors, it's not very many. The audio guide is available in 10 languages. It covers 260 stops. So that doesn't mean that there were 260 commentaries. There are quite a few more than that. But it covers 260 objects in the permanent collection. This is the only product that the museum offers. Well, let's just say the only substantial product that the museum offers for people who do not speak English. That's not something that I'm particularly proud of. I think that the British Museum needs to do much better in serving our international audiences, particularly since they make up almost 70% of our visiting population. I noticed that one of the themes at the conference today has been translation, localization, internationalization. And we are in a unique position to be able to test different kinds of approaches to localization. And from my point of view, it should be an absolute priority for us, again, because the majority of our visitors do not come from the UK. There were 5 questions, or you might call them challenges, to the traditional audio guide that we set out to tackle in this project. And the 5 questions, or the 5 topics, are listed here. Right, to increase the take-up rate. So I'll say something more about that in a moment. How to keep the content regularly updated, how to improve the way in which we speak visitors' languages, how to relax our voice. So those of you who are familiar with the British Museum know that it's a very formal institution. And one of the things and challenges that we have is how to make our voice friendlier and more approachable, and how to close the circle. And by this I mean how to maintain the relationship with our visitors once they leave. So, first question, can we increase take-up? So as I said, we sell about 170,000 guides a year. That's our adult guide. We do offer different guides. So just to say that there were 4 products that make up this project. So I noticed in the previous presentation and some of the earlier presentations today that access products, so in other words, those for guides for the visually impaired and for deaf visitors, are audio descriptive guides, are kind of included in this, kind of umbrella, which is an audio guide. One of the things that we did was to split that out, mainly because we felt like those individual products have their own unique qualities and their own unique audiences. And we felt like keeping them under the umbrella of an audio guide probably wasn't doing justice to those audiences and the way in which those products needed to be dealt with separately for the unique needs of those audiences. So as I say, there were 4 products that are part of this project. I'm talking about the main adult audio guide today, but feel free to ask me questions or to stop me afterwards if you're interested in either of the access products or the family guide. So we did build a family game as well. We replaced our audio guide with our children's audio guide with a family game. Okay, so take-up rate. Take-up rate for these types of products in museums like the British Museum are very low. Our take-up rate is between 2.5% and 3% generally of the total visiting population. Now, I don't know about you, but I work really hard on these products, and I feel like I've given my life to them, and I'd certainly like more people to appreciate them and more people to use them. There was an interesting study that was done at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art several years ago. You can Google it. It was from the Museums and the Web conference by Peter Sammis. And what it showed is that the more people use interpretive products, the more they learn about the exhibition and the more they appreciate what they've seen. I mean, this is kind of common sense, but it's actually good to have that quantified, which means that in addition to my goal to make the product, I feel like my goal is also to ensure that more people use it, because the more people who use it, the more people will appreciate our collection. And hopefully we'll take them deeper than they might have otherwise gone on their own. What did we discover by investigating take-up? So we conducted a 5-week market research project. I'm going to pull in a word from product management here, which is we also did customer development. So one of the unique things that's happened at the British Museum over the last year is that we've introduced this new discipline called product management. I had no idea what it was a year ago when I was given this job. And over the past year, I've made an effort to try and understand what it is. It's something which is well known in the software industry, and I think it does have its uses within the museum. My colleagues don't understand what it is at all. They think I'm a project manager. But product management brings with it certain tools, and one of those is something called customer development. And that is something that goes further than market research, investigating not only who your target audience is or who your target market is, but what they want from the product and whether they will actually buy it. So, as I say, we conducted a 5-week exercise in market research and product development in order to tackle the question of increasing the take-up rate. What we discovered is that the majority of visitors who do not take the audio guide don't take it because they think it will not fit with the amount of time that they have for their visit. Right? There's a real misunderstanding about audio guides in that most people think that an audio tour and an audio guide is the same thing, right? But it's not, as we know, as we've seen earlier. So some of the earlier presentations, I'm just thinking of the first presentation today, we saw clearly you have a keypad, right? So you can access things randomly, random access, you can key things in. Or you can follow a recorrido, right, a tour. So you've got those two options. Tours do sometimes lock you in, not always, but certainly most visitors who were not taking audio guides had the impression that they were only tours. Okay. The other thing we discovered, which was a much clearer understanding of who our tourist audience is. Again, we say that the majority of our audience are non-English speakers, right? They're not from the UK. And most of them are tourists. Within the museum world, I think there's a little bit of, well, at least certainly in my museum, I don't know about your own, but there is a bit of a kind of a negative attitude towards tourists. You know, like as if they're somehow less worthy, you know, than people who come for other reasons. You know, people who come because they want to increase their knowledge or they want to have a spiritual experience with art. And this is one of the things that I've been trying to fight against, which is that tourists, from my point of view, have just as much right to be there as anyone else, right? And they have just as much right for us to spend time thinking about and understanding their needs of our products than anyone else. So one of the things that we learned, because we know this audience very, very little, is that they move from a highly structured to a loosely structured visit. What this means is that it challenged and contradicted something we thought about tourists before, which was that they don't know what they want to see. Okay, that's not true. They do. They actually do know exactly what they want to see. They generally have been given advice. They've checked on the internet. They have a guidebook. They have looked at TripAdvisor. They've heard of the museum. They do know what it is that they want to see. When they come to the British Museum, they want to see the mummies. They want to see ancient Egypt. They want to see the Parthenon galleries. And possibly they want to see Roman Britain, right? Once they've seen those things, once they've ticked their boxes, it's at that point that then they're open to advice from us, not before. So understanding the fact that the tourist visit changes modes from something structured to unstructured was a real insight for us. Okay, so I think maybe I'll speed up a little bit. I'm conscious of time. We used the information that we gained from this research period to develop a marketing strategy. So again, I think this is something unique to the discipline of product management, which was new to me, is that not only was I suddenly responsible for the product, I was responsible for everything else. Meaning that I had to get involved in the marketing strategy. I spent a lot more time with the marketing manager than I ever have in the past. Our goal was to increase take-up, and in order to do that, it's not just about the product, it's about everything else around the product, and marketing was crucial. So we focused on on-site marketing. If you really think about it, I mean, who's going to come to the British Museum because we have a new audio guide, right? no one cares. I mean, it's when they're on site that suddenly that becomes important. We focused on time, so we tried to think of ways in which we could present the product so that it appeals to people who have 45 minutes, who have an hour and a half, as well as a half a day or a day. We emphasized also multiple languages, and we integrated multiple languages into the campaign in a way that we never have before. An interesting fact is that Mandarin Chinese is our best-selling language. And let's see, I've got a graph here. Bear with me a second. Okay, so this graph is the growth of Chinese language guide sales over the past few years. So I don't have a graph for this year, obviously not yet, which is a little green dot on the left-hand side. But the blue line and the red line show the last 2 years, so the light blue line at the top. So you can see that the number of Chinese guides that we are selling is dramatically increasing. The other thing that we discovered about this is that the peak in Chinese guide sales is different from those of other foreign tourists. So again, this is new territory for us. We need to actually understand what the patterns of Chinese tourism are, and we need to understand actually what our Chinese visitors are looking for in a guide. We need to think about the kinds of regional accents that narrators are using on the guide, and whether or not those are suitable for the kinds of Chinese visitors that are coming to our museum. Okay, sorry, unhelpfully I've just closed the browser, so bear with me just a second. So I have to say that I really admire Elena's work at the Met, because we are very much still at the beginning of trying to understand in a much greater detail the kind of thing that she is working on at the Met. So we have at this stage ourselves very little quantitative information. This bit of information about the about Chinese visitors is just the beginning of that. Okay, so I think maybe we'll skip this for now. And what I'm going to show you next is a picture of the new audio guide desk. So this was our approach to improving the on-site visibility of our audio guide desk. So one of the things that you can see is that there's a big red banner at the top. We are calling it an audio guide, not a multimedia guide, right? Why is that? We asked visitors, and nobody knew what a multimedia guide was. Sorry, guys, because I know you've been using that term a lot today. Genuinely, none of our visitors really understood what a multimedia guide was or what it was going to offer them. From our point of view, I mean, there could be different reasons why and criteria why you might decide to call it a multimedia guide to differentiate it from something you've done in the past. But we have video, we have images, we have, an interactive map and so on. But we feel comfortable calling it an audio guide because that's what people recognize. And if our goal is to increase take-up rate, which it is, then we need to call it something that visitors recognize and which they're more likely to use. So we're calling it an audio guide. We benchmarked 19 other organizations around the world that were similar to us, and none of them used the term multimedia guide to refer to their products. So that's the reason why we reverted back to this name, even though we had called it a multimedia guide for the past 6 years. So you can see that audio guide features very prominently. These banners that you can see at the top have gone up. It's very unusual for us to have gotten permission to hang something so prominently in the Great Court, but we're really pleased with them. And then you can see down at the bottom here, there were, it's not very clear in this picture, but there were actually 5 large video screens here, which are playing something which is similar to the trailer, a kind of an adaptation of it. There is foreign language which appears particularly in our most popular languages, on that final screen, which gives people, again, in other languages, information about what the offer is and how they can use it. That might sound really obvious, but again, the British Museum has never done that before. We need to do more of it. We tackled the question of, can we keep it updated? All right, so those of you who know the museum a little bit, you probably know that Neil McGregor, our director, has just stepped down. We have a new director who's come from Germany, and he, before Neil McGregor, one of the highlights of, I guess, Neil McGregor's tenure at the British Museum was this program called A History of the World in 100 Objects. This was, from our point of view, on the audio guide team, a really annoying project. Because what it meant was that half of these objects, which were in the permanent galleries, and most of them on the audio guide, because they were highlights of the museum's collection, went on tour. So, for the last 2 years, there have been 40 objects missing from the audio guide, and we had no way of updating it. So, a little bit about how we approached this. We decided to build a native Android application. Now, it's unlikely we'll have time for questions, but a really good question, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, might be later. Why did you not build an app that people could download onto their own devices? This offer is only available on site. Okay, that's a really, really good question. I won't go into it now, but there are reasons why we decided not to do that, not least because there are roughly 20 gigabytes of content that go onto the guide. Anyway, we built a native Android app. We used an API-based CMS, content management system, called Contentful. We have nightly updates, so we installed 6 wireless access points at the multimedia guide desk to increase the bandwidth at the desk. We purchased 1,000 Android devices. So again, please don't tweet this. We're using HTC phones. Because that was anyway, we went through a complicated tender process, and that was the outcome. So we're using HTC Desire phones, which are running Android. They are running 3 of our own native apps, one of which is a sort of a framework app, which then manages the nightly updates. And we have an improved workflow with our collections managers to have our collections management system be updated when objects are removed from display. Okay, let's talk a little bit about language. I think that's a super important topic, especially here, and it's come up a lot today. We used Acoustiguide to do our localization, meaning we used an American company to produce the new content that we added to the guide, and then Acoustiguide did all of the translation. However, we took some of that work in-house. We've never done that before. So I hired a localization manager to work on the team, and her only job, was to manage, check, and confirm the quality of all of the translations that we got. Okay, you'd be surprised. The Russian studio, for example, decided to go a little crazy with music. And so they used lots and lots of different music clips that were not authorized by us, not authorized by the curators. And yeah, I mean, it livened things up, I'm sure. But it really wasn't appropriate, and it certainly wasn't consistent with what we had agreed with the curators. In Japanese, we had some interesting things happen. So someone mentioned earlier that it was in that first presentation, I think, that the voice, the narrator that you have in English, I think, is that right, is quite robotic and maybe not as expressive as they could be. So in our Japanese studio, they actually did use a robot. They used, for one of the curators' voices, they used a machine. And we wouldn't have known this had we not had our Japanese checker thoroughly listen to everything that came back from the studio. And then they re-recorded it with a real person. One of the other challenges of localization we had was the tagline, so all of the marketing materials. And again, here, the advantage of having someone in-house managing this process was tremendous, because it meant that the entire product and all of the pieces could be checked by the same person for consistency. So what we discovered at some point was that we had 2 different translations for our tagline in Spanish. So the tagline, which again someone mentioned earlier, is the British Museum Your Way in English. And we went with this for Spanish in the end, but the original translation was a su manera. Okay, now the reason why, long story, which I will try to keep short, is that in Italian, for example, or in French, we have this slightly other form that we can use, which works. You might imagine that we could have gotten around the formal versus informal question in Spanish by using vuestro, right? I mean, in theory. It turned out that one of the checkers who was helping us in Spanish is from Peru, as are many of our visitors, and that sounded incredibly awkward to her. So we ended up going with tu in the end. Again, you can ask me more about that. We did, again, some informal testing to check to make sure that that was appropriate. You still may be slightly dubious, but that's what we've gone with. And again, languages now appear in the marketing campaign, particularly Chinese. So this is a randomly misplaced slide. This is our content management system. Just throw that in for fun. Relaxing our voice. Okay, so one of the things that we tried to do, again, was to make the British Museum seem more approachable and to seem friendlier as part of the content production for this new product. We used an American company who have done a lot of work with National Public Radio. So if you're familiar with National Public Radio, then you have a sense of what their style is. It's journalistic. It also includes lots of sound effects. It also includes lots of contributions from curators and sort of experts. And in order to accomplish that, because they were obviously in the States, we ended up doing a lot of in-house audio recording. So again, this was something I feel like worked well for the project, was having, in our case, it was someone called a junior product manager, but it's the equivalent of like a content producer in-house who could organize all the curators, have them come to a particular room on a particular day with a freelance audio engineer, and do those recordings that then were incorporated into the final product. You know, there's always this tension, isn't there, working in a museum between authority and approachability. And it's a difficult line to walk. What makes it that much more complicated is having to localize your content. So although originally we were far more ambitious in wanting to make it casual in tone, I think we came to the conclusion that making jokes probably really wouldn't be appropriate. You can imagine that jokes in British English don't translate well for North Americans, and you know, again, these same problems. And so I just to highlight, okay, this issue of localization, what I really hope, I mean, at the British Museum, I mean, we've got so far to go, but what I would really like to see is that we focus enough and invest enough resources in localization that what we could do is we can have different versions for South American Spanish and for Castilian Spanish, right? I mean, this is the ideal. I mean, this is what commercial companies do. They get to that level of detail where you're offering content which is really, really appropriate. So from my point of view, I have to say, you know, I know there's a lot of talk about personalization and, you know, personalized tours and, you know, speaking to the individual visitor and all of that. And that's hugely important. And I think depending on your context, it's more important. It may be possible. But from where I sit, at the institution that I work, this type of personalization, which is just really good localization, is more important than the kind of personalization where, you know, you allow someone to, say, create a personalized tour for them. As I say, that for me is the level of personalization. Once we're there, then I feel like taking it to the next level of increased participation, interaction, and personalization becomes appropriate. I mean, let's get the basics done first. Anyway, we did a lot of voice testing. So again, you know, trying to identify for our most popular languages. Okay, we had to prioritize. We couldn't do testing on all voices, especially because hardly anybody takes our Arabic guide. But we did test Chinese voices, and we did make some really sort of we made some difficult decisions about which voices to include or exclude based on regional accents in China. Okay, again, there were some example clips. I'm not going to go into too much detail there. Okay, closing the circle. So again, the virtuous circle that we're all so familiar with and that we all strive to realize. contacting, being in touch with the visitor before the visit, providing all the services they need during the visit, and then continuing the relationship with them after the visit. How did we do this? All right, so again, this is one of the things that we've applied from good product management practice, I think, is that we tested thoroughly and consistently throughout the project. So by the time we launched this product, it had probably been in front of, well, different parts of it had been in front of probably 400 people. And one of the things that we tested thoroughly was this My Visit feature. So the My Visit feature of the new guide keeps track of what people have visited. You can see there's an infographic there which actually shows them which areas of the collection that they've seen. Those colors are consistent with our map as well, and sort of a basic way of wayfinding around the museum. Excuse me. And they can put their email address into the device, into the app, at the end of their visit, and then overnight, during the nightly update, an email is sent to them which contains that infographic, as well as images of all of the objects they've seen. Just a couple of words at the very end here about the nature of maintaining that relationship. So again, depending on your institution, depending on who your audience is, your strategy for maintaining that relationship will be different. At the British Museum, we don't have a very good strategy for maintaining relationships with tourist visitors, again, because we don't understand them very well, and we don't speak their language often. But what we do know is that they normally visit the museum once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime, right? I mean, that's like, the one time you go bungee jumping, or, the one time, childbirth. I mean, once or twice in a lifetime. I mean, it's a hugely significant moment. And I just wish that everyone in my institution appreciated that. I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, here we have this opportunity. We see them like once, and it's a life-defining moment when they come to the museum. And if only we had that as our guiding principle. Certainly, having them sign up for an email newsletter which tells them, what our next temporary exhibition is. And, we contact them every 2 weeks to try and encourage them to become a member, or, I don't know, to sell something in the shop. I mean, to me, those things are completely at odds. You don't send someone who comes to the British Museum once in a lifetime a marketing email every 2 weeks. It just doesn't make sense, right? What I would like, I mean, in other words, if I put myself in, the shoes of someone who's visiting there once, once or twice, and by twice we mean like 25 years apart, right? Then what I might like is you to remind me once a year on the anniversary of my visit that I came to the British Museum a year ago, or I came to the British Museum 15 years ago on that day. Right? And here are some of the things I saw. Oh, by the way, in the meantime, we've acquired some new contemporary work in the area of the, of the gallery, or the area of the collection that you liked most. So, like I say, I think what we don't understand about the tourist journey is a lot. And what we don't understand about how to really maintain that relationship in a meaningful way is a lot. I hope, let's just say that it's certainly my goal to try and understand that better. Did we succeed? Unfortunately, as much as I would like to say that we know a lot more, we don't know very much. We launched this product in December of last year, so again, it's too early to say. Sales were up 20% in January. That was with far fewer devices than we normally would have. We were selling out quite a bit. So I'm encouraged by that. I'm hopeful that what it means is that our marketing is working. Of course, you have to allow for the fact that the British Museum's visitors are constantly increasing. So in other words, we're looking at like 8 million visitors sort of in the next 3 to 5 years. So there is some percentage of that which is just a sort of an expected increase in the number of visitors, but certainly not 20%. We're seeing longer dwell times, and I think that has a lot to do with the transparency of the interface, people being able to find the content and hopefully enjoying the content that they do find. And we do have really positive feedback. We've had a lot of teething problems, though, I have to say. So again, here's the part that you probably shouldn't tweet. We had lots of difficulties with the mobile device management system, with AirWatch and HTC devices. very difficult. We had lots of problems, oddly enough, with SD cards, which were 1/2 millimeter too small for the slots. Anyway, lots of problems, but we are gradually fixing them. And certainly when the guides do work, they work well and visitors like them. We have lots more evaluation to do, so hopefully I can come to you at some point in future and share some more concrete statistics about what we're finding and how people are consuming the content. As I say, we tested thoroughly. I'm hopeful that that what we've done really meets visitors' needs, but we won't know for sure, for certain, until we do some real evaluation of it. So thank you very much.